Shalom to all our viewers around the world from Jerusalem. This is another program of Middle East Review, and as usual, these days, everything is full packed with the events, starting with the mysterious death of President of Iran, Raisi, on this jungle borders between Azerbaijan and Iran. Of course, ongoing operations of IDF, Israeli forces in Gaza, including moving into Rafah, which I think has been vindicated with the success that Israel has in Rafah. I think everybody would will not dispute the fact that it is necessary from certainly on the ground from a military point of view to really crush Hamas, but also I think from political point of view about the day after. So the operation in Rafah will have far-reaching consequences, and on that, we are, as usual here, joined by our good friend and ally, Dr. Colonel Reserve Intelligence, Eran Lerman. Maybe, Eran, we should start with a little bit far from here, Iran. A lot of conspiracy theories about the demise of their president.
Well, quite frankly, anyone who flies 50-year-old Bell helicopters with no American supply of spare parts takes a certain risk. So I'm not sure that we need to go into conspiracy theories. What is more important and more fascinating is the reaction of many Iranians. Not all Iranians, for sure. The almost joy. It's not a noble thing to celebrate the death of anyone, but it reflects a deep-held hostility, not only to him, the butcher of Tehran, the man who sent thousands to their death as part of the legal kangaroo courts, that repressed the opposition in the 80s. So
even among all the butchers in Tehran, he stood out.
He stood out as the butcher. The butcher. And you see sometimes, we had a conference at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, and one of our scholars is an expert on Iran, Alex Greenberg, and he showed a tweet in Persian. And there's a big bear knocking on the door. And the subtitle in Persian was, "You have some dental floss, the turban stuck in my teeth," because reportedly there are bears in these woods. I mean, there's a kind of ugly sense of humor, but it tells you something of the depth of hate and frustration of many Iranians, particularly, I assume, the better educated Iranians with a regime that has brought them nothing but misery, certainly in the last generation. So that's maybe the one ray of hope, looking down, way down into the future, in a period of darkness and concern. And perhaps the obverse side of this is that while many Iranians felt relieved that they were rid of this man, the UN as an institution honored him with a minute of silence, the flags at half-mast.
Outrageous.
I mean, this is a total moral bankruptcy of the international community institutionally as such.
Lowering the UN flag to half-mast. Even the American ambassador, actually it was the deputy American ambassador that was at the Security Council at the time, stood up in silence for a butcher, the one who is the worst enemy of human rights, the worst enemy of the United States, calling on the demise, the United States, death to America. I mean, this is just not only hypocrisy, it's stupidity.
Yeah, let's say validates those in Israel who were looking at the same time at what was happening in specific other international institutions like the ICJ and the ICC, and saying to themselves the international system has been thoroughly corrupted by very dangerous influences and moral rot.
Yeah.
And had we been subject to the jurisdiction of such institutions back in the 1940s, Hitler would still be with us.
Absolutely.
So it is quite disconcerting. Yeah.
But Eran, let me go back to Raisi. First of all, the Iranian regime is blaming the United States because of the sanctions, no spare parts. They have a very old fleet of helicopters and other avionic parts and all that. Okay. They did not take into consideration their own doing, what brought about the sanctions. But with this, all the conspiracy theories, of course, Israel was, in the United States, it was quite, I would say, outstanding that Israel, unofficially, but sources in Jerusalem were quick to say it was not Israel.
Well, Israel never, except maybe, there was some thought of getting rid of Arafat at a certain point. But basically, we never indulged in going after the leadership of enemies. But beyond that, of course, the whole thing arose because of all sorts of humorous comments in Israel. It must have been this Mossad agent helicopter, which some people took seriously. And so on Aviron, which is Hebrew for an airplane, these kind of inventive, humorous reactions were picked up by some fools in Iran as evidence.
There's no doubt Israel is not involved. I don't think any foreign forces...
The question is really what will be the impact.
Yes, but before that, it's interesting to see that let's say, always when there is something, foul going on, you have to ask whose interest was it? Who gains from it?
Well, there has been some speculation.
And who gains from this?
Mujtaba
the
Khamenei, son of Khamenei, who is now being mentioned as the undisputed claimant. By the way, it tells you something about the utter rot, not only of the concept of the Iranian regime, but also of by its own lights. You can say about Khomeini many things, but he was a very senior religious figure.
Not like Khamenei.
He was an Ayatollah also. He was a man of intellectual substance as a lawgiver and as an interpreter of Shia religious law. Khamenei is second-rate.
The current supreme leader, yeah.
And the idea that this should go to his son, or to a man like Raisi, who was also very minor, but also a very minor cleric of very minor distinction, tells you something. None of the real authorities in the Shia world, in the Shia faith, the people referred to as marja' taqlid in Arabic, as sources of emulation, like
authorities on
religious matters, like Fadlallah in Lebanon or Sistani in Iraq, lend their support to this regime. They see it as a perversion of their own religion. Sometimes some of them in very sharp language. What Fadlallah had to say about Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon after what he did to Lebanon, very sharp. So this is not the embodiment, with all due respect to Huntington, this is not the embodiment of Islam or of Shia Islam. It is an offshoot, a perversion of Shia religion.
Which brings me to the next question. What would be the impact of the Raisi death on Iran, first of all, foreign policy? What would that do to the, let's say, the situation on the ground throughout the Middle East? And not less importantly, what would it do in Iran internally?
Well, this brings me to one of the most troubling news I've seen this month, which is that there is a back channel that the Biden administration opened with the Iranian regime, in an attempt to gain their agreement, possibly to some kind of reduction of tensions in the Red Sea.
And again, they use their back channel through the Omanis.
The Omanis. Yeah, it was almost amusing that back in 2013, they believed that they can hide this from Israel. And I know of at least one senior Israeli who said, do you want the numbers of the tail numbers of the planes that brought you to Oman? The idea that they could talk to Raisi troubles me, because at the end of the day, I mean, talk is good if you're speaking from a position of strength. If you are you position yourself, beseeching the Iranians to behave better, you send a signal which is very troubling to the rest of weakness to the rest of the region. Now, this has probably been disrupted now because the Iranians have to put their own house in order, and there will be an election.
Of course, we should not forget that with Raisi, also Abdullahian, the very radical foreign minister of Iran, also was on the plane and also is dead.
Yes, and the man who was the negotiator for the attempts to renew the JCPOA, Bahiri, is now the acting foreign minister. So it could go either way. It very much depends on whether Khamenei and the people around him take the measure of public anger, frustration, economic deprivation. And once again, as they did back in 10 years ago, come to the conclusion that they are risking the survival of the regime unless they modify their policies and come to some kind of understanding with the West. This they refuse to do. Khamenei believes in revolutionary economics. Let's eat dirt until we are powerful. But this is not necessarily how the majority of Iranians see the situation, or those who are directly suffering. And so he may once again turn to a more moderate option. There's no guarantee. It's all in the mind of one man who is a sworn deadly enemy of not only of Israel, which he seeks to destroy and eliminate. And we saw this at the funeral. That he was telling Haniyeh from Hamas, the time is coming for Israel's elimination from the river to the sea. But also an enemy, deeply committed enemy of the West, of America, of everything that we cherish as values. So what his decision will be is difficult to assess. But since he is also not a young man anymore, the Iranian regime is facing a turbulent transition, and it could be a non-linear process. And if they actually do try to turn this into a dynastic proposition, I'm not sure the Iranian people will accept it. Remember, the Egyptians, I think above all, were offended by the idea that they could become like Syria, a Jamlaka, if you remember that term.
Sure.
A Jumhuriya republic that becomes a mamlaka, a kingdom.
With Gamal and Mubarak replacing Mubarak. Yeah.
Jimmy was the appointed successor. So what are we like Syria, that we can, that a country like Egypt,
or God forbid, like monarchies like Morocco and Saudi Arabia.
Monarchies are fine. That's legitimate, monarchies are monarchies.
Yeah.
But a republic, the ultimate absurdity, of course, is our friends in North Korea, which a communist country going from father to son to grandson. Good old Marx is probably turning in his grave in London. So the idea, maybe, I don't know. It's not more than a hunch, but while the death of Raisi changes very little because the responsibilities of the president in Iran are very limited. Every real function is in the hands of the supreme leader. The signals that surround it, the anger, the public anger, and the signs of real difficulties for the regime, that could be perhaps the beginning of a much broader story.
That's a very interesting comment.
But we have to be very careful and patient. And at the end, this is something that can only, the only thing that can help this along is a strict regime of effective sanctions. And it's not fully in place right now. And even in some of our best friends, without using names here.
In Europe,
not only in Europe, some of our best friends are contributing to the breaches in the sanction system.
I know. Also a big country in the East that is counterweight to China.
Yes.
But with such, a dictatorial, authoritarian police state regime, you never know from the outside. It's very opaque. It's very hard to go into. You never know what would be the moment of implosion.
Yes.
The Soviet regime, they...
you could see it sinking slowly,
Right,
and then came the counter-revolution, the Gekachepe coup of August 91, which sunk the ship.
Exactly.
And then it disintegrates.
So the same here. Let's say that, nobody has a crystal ball, but certainly the Iranian regime is a little bit weaker with the Raisi's death and with the Ayalon
the reactions to
Raisi's and the
death.
Right. And it will be interesting to see if there will be any ramifications. As you mentioned, right now they continue with their far-reaching goals of unstabling the entire Middle East, basically taking over the Middle East as a hegemon.
And the nuclear project.
And the nuclear program.
Roaring ahead in a dangerous fashion. Recently, the IAEA, Grossi and spoke to this. We have every reason to be very deeply concerned. Israeli plans for the future must take into account the need to be able to counter this, perhaps with all that we have, at the right moment, because with all due respect to the war in Gaza, this is the ultimate existential issue, not only for us.
Not only for us.
For the entire global order.
Exactly. And we see that to that effect of their strengthening their hegemonious aspirations, they tighten relations with the other, points on the axis of evil, whether it's Russia, including even collaborating on military exercises together, China, and of course North Korea.
Yes, now, I used to say that you saw in the parades in Tehran on the Shihab-3 missiles, two things, made in Iran and death to Israel. And both, I hope, are false in the same degree, because these were not made in Iran. These were painted over North Korean no-dongs.
Exactly.
And Israel is not that easy to kill, as the Iranians found on the 14th of April.
Right.
So, but still, we have to look at Iran as the fountainhead of regional instability. On this, we are not alone. We have to find ways to broaden and strengthen what we saw on the 14th of April. And we need to see an American administration which is fully committed and can reassure its regional allies that it is committed.
Exactly, because we see now
to facing up to the Iranian challenge. 14th of April was an important milestone at the military level, but at the level of grand strategy and at the level of diplomacy, the signals from Washington are confusing.
And this is what, there is no void. And if there is a signal or a perception of weakness in the West, of course, in Washington as the leader of the Western democracies, we see how this axis of evil, the four countries we mentioned, are pushing forward. And we see it not only in the Middle East, we see it also in Africa, we see it in the Sahel, where they're trying to push
Sudan recently,
and Sudan, new agreement.
Signed an agreement with the Russians. It's very interesting because originally Wagner's force supported his enemy, but now it's switched around. The Russians and the Chinese are making inroads, and that's quite troubling. It also means that our own war is of immense importance because it will determine to a large extent who has the upper hand.
Yes.
Iran and its proxies and allies and partners. Hamas is not a proxy. Palestinian Islamic Jihad is a proxy.
Right.
But it is an ally of Iran, as we
Mm-hmm.
saw at Raisi's funeral.
Yeah.
And our ability to ultimately overcome and destroy this challenge and have it replaced in Gaza by something that completely blocks off a renewed Hamas takeover. Not necessarily, I believe, IDF presence in the long run. There are viable other alternatives, difficult but viable.
Yeah. So if we go back now,
Then, but that can only happen after Hamas is military beaten. And that's what makes the Rafah operation, despite all the international uproar and the ambiguous, I have to say, ambiguous language coming out of the International Court of Justice, saying Israel should halt the operations in Rafah insofar as they endanger the population.
right.
We are doing our best to make sure that
Which
they
is
don't
basically
endanger
was the
population.
long-standing position of the Biden administration, and they keep
Yes.
saying that. And I
But
think
many of the million or more refugees who crowded in the southern Gaza Strip have now been moved to areas where there have been tents and infrastructure supplied.
And I think that even the Americans were pleasantly surprised that the operation of actually evacuating these displaced Gazans in the Rafah area was going fairly easily and fairly quickly without any major disruptions. Even the Egyptians were quite mute lately in the last few days.
And
because at the end of the day, it's our mutual interest to do away with Hamas. Egypt, Hamas is a mortal enemy of Sisi and his regime. It's a mortal enemy of the United States. It's against the United States' ambitions and vision of the region, with normalization with Saudi Arabia, with a two-state solution, for that matter. The Hamas is against this. They want just one Sharia, one Islamic state. So I think, as we see, they speak as they need to, in a very careful way diplomatically, but basically we see a tacit support of Israel's moving and doing away with Hamas.
True enough, and I think in this respect, the American grand design of bringing the Saudis in, normalization, all of this, I'm not saying it's the wrong cart. I'm just saying you don't hitch the cart in front of the horse.
Right.
The horse has to be, actually two horses, defeat of Hamas and a firm, effective stand against Iran.
Right.
Then you can hitch the cart behind them. If you hitch the cart in front of them, you stumble.
Exactly.
And I think this is what I see as the basic flaw in the ideas that keep are being floated around.
The American vision is quite valid and appropriate one, but their roadmap to this vision is flawed, as you mentioned. If you don't take care of Iran, especially their nuclear ambitions, if you don't do away with all the negative forces here, like Hamas, Hezbollah also has to be tamed, the Houthis, all this. If you don't do this, there's no way you can build, on such a shaky ground, a new architecture of peace in the Middle East.
True enough. There has been, as I said, there has been progress demonstrated on the 14th of April in generating an architecture of military cooperation at the operational level.
Yeah.
But for this to become strategic, this cannot be squared with an ambiguous stand on the elimination of Hamas and an ambiguous stand on the question of how firmly Iran should be dealt with. And I think these are the keys to the future.
Right. And
of course, it's not that easy to manage this in an election year in an American society which is torn between radicalized and elements from left and right and isolation, MAGA isolationists on one hand and progressive woke elements and the noise rising to high heaven from the university campuses. It's enough, to take a university campus of 30,000 and bring 500 of which half of which are not even students of the university, and turn it into a hotbed of support for the Palestinian cause, which means Hamas. And then it turns out, in Colombia, in the midst of all of this, they elected a pro-Israeli woman as the university student president. Right. So noise is one thing, realities are another. But in an election year, it's very difficult. And in the world of fake news, it's very difficult to tell one from the other. And it makes the decisions in Washington more difficult. But the key is there. Absolutely.
And unfortunately, the polarization throughout democratic countries with fake news, with this social networking technology, which is being abused by the enemies of democracies like China and Russia, with psychological warfare, with actually all the bots and all those fake news, is trying to actually undermine democracies and push forward. We'll have elections. So I agree with you that until the elections in November in Washington, we will not see any grand moves of policies, but this is very, very important. But this will leave for the next program, because right now we have to finish. So thank you all for watching the Middle East Review coming from Jerusalem.